Losing my dad just a few weeks ago has been one of the hardest things I've ever had to face. For as long as I can remember, his health had been declining, a slow, painful process that left a shadow over our family. Now, he's gone. It's a reality I keep struggling to accept. My name is Kelly, and lately, I've found myself replaying old memories, the weight of them bearing down on me. One thought always lingers, and it's the one that hurts the most. I never got to introduce my dad to his grandchildren. That thought alone brings a heavy sigh every time. 5 years ago, when I was 37, I married the love of my life. It was such a beautiful, perfect day. My dad, despite his condition, was there, smiling, as we shared that father-daughter dance. We made a promise that day, a special one. I told him I would be the first to share the news when I was expecting. It was a promise I couldn't wait to fulfill. Now, it's the biggest regret I carry with me, knowing I'll never have the chance. That promise will forever remain unkept. His illness, which was discovered just a year ago, changed everything. From that moment on, I did everything I could to be there for him. I visited our childhood home more often, spending hours by his hospital bed with my mom, trying to offer whatever comfort I could. We called each other more, and video chatted as often as possible, even when it was hard to see how much he had changed. But even with all that, I still find myself wondering, was it enough? Could I have done more? It's a question that haunts me in the quiet moments. I whispered those thoughts aloud once, sitting in the living room with my mom. Could I have done more? I asked, more to myself than to her. My mom, always the supportive one, reached out and took my hand, her voice soft and reassuring. Kelly, you did everything you could. Your dad knew that. He was proud of you. As comforting as her words were, they never fully erased that ache inside me. Just as I was lost in thought, my sister Julia walked in with a man I didn't recognize, a man who looked about 45, maybe a lawyer. This is Scott. She introduced him quickly, the attorney. I nodded, glancing at my mom, who looked just as confused as I was. We all sat down, but before we could get into any kind of discussion, Julia blurted out, "The lawyer said Dad left us a significant inheritance." Her words cut through the air like a knife. I felt something stir inside me. "Julia," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "you know it's not all yours." The tension in the room was immediate. Julia and I have always had a rocky relationship, and Dad's illness only made things worse. While I did everything I could to be there for him, Julia stayed away. I tried so many times to bring them closer, to bridge the gap, but it was like talking to a brick wall. She just never made the effort, and that distance between us grew wider with every day that passed. Her refusal to visit our dad, even during his toughest moments, left a bitter taste in my mouth. My comment clearly touched a nerve. "You're an adult," I said, trying to control my frustration. "There's no need to be so stubborn." "I'm not being stubborn," she snapped back, her face flushed with irritation. "Living in the city and traveling out here to the countryside isn't as simple as you think. It's a 5-hour drive." She spat those words like they were supposed to mean something. "It's just 5 hours," I countered, feeling my patience slip. "If Dad was that important to you, you could have made the effort now and then." "Kelly, those 5 hours aren't just about time. It costs money, and yes, money matters to me," she said flatly. That was it. Her attitude, her excuses, it all just piled on top of the resentment I'd been trying to bury. "It's not about money, Julia," I replied, feeling the heat in my chest rising. "It's about being there for him." But she didn't care. She never had. That was the bitter truth I had to swallow. The lawyer, sensing the growing tension, stepped in. "Perhaps we could all take a moment to calm down," he suggested. I sighed, leaning back in my chair, trying to let the frustration dissipate. "I'm sorry," I said softly, mostly to the room, and the lawyer nodded before continuing. He explained that he was there to discuss my father's will. When was this arranged? My mother asked, her voice barely a whisper. The lawyer explained that a few weeks before Dad passed, he'd made a new will at the hospital, with his primary doctor present. It was a moment that must have been hard for my dad, but I was grateful he had taken care of everything, even though it hurt to think about those final moments without us by his side. The lawyer then pulled out a white envelope. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized my father's handwriting on it. A lump formed in my throat. Julia, always impatient, barked out, "Just get on with it. What does it say?" Inside, the lawyer revealed the contents: our childhood home, some land, some savings, and something none of us had expected, a storage shed. Julia's face twisted in confusion, and I shared the sentiment. I'd never heard Dad talk about a storage shed before. "What about the farm?" Julia asked, her voice sharp, like she was waiting for some missing piece of the puzzle. The lawyer looked through the documents. The farm was leased land, he said, sounding just as surprised as we were. I had assumed we owned the farm all these years, but it turned out we didn't. Julia, clearly disappointed, didn't hide her frustration, but to me, it was almost a relief. Neither of us knew anything about farming. The conversation shifted to how everything would be divided. The house and land would go to my mother, which seemed fair, but then, Julia made her move. "I'll take the cash," she said quickly, as if it was already decided. I couldn't believe her audacity. "Hold on," I interrupted. "Why should you get all the cash?" "Because I'm the eldest," she said, like it was the most natural answer in the world. "You can have the storage shed." Her dismissal of the shed stung. She didn't see any value in it, but something about her attitude rubbed me the wrong way. She was married to a wealthy CEO, yet she always wanted more. I felt trapped, cornered into accepting the shed, which she clearly saw as worthless. With a sigh, I reluctantly agreed. Julia signed the papers, laughing to herself as if she just won some grand prize. My mother, seeing the unease in my eyes, tried to offer some comfort. "You might find something wonderful inside that shed," she said gently. "Give it a chance." I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to believe there was something special waiting for me, something my dad had left behind just for me, but another part of me felt like I had been cheated out of something more. After we finished with the lawyer, I took the key to the shed and walked there by myself. It was tucked away, beside a field that had gone quiet since Dad got too sick to farm. The path was overgrown, the air still and heavy. When I reached the shed, I hesitated for a moment, standing in front of the door, wondering what, if anything, would be inside. With a deep breath, I unlocked the door, the old hinges creaking as I pushed it open. A thick layer of dust greeted me, along with the smell of neglect. It was just as I had feared, nothing more than an old shed filled with forgotten tools. I couldn't help but feel disappointed. Was this really all there was? But then something caught my eye. The shed seemed smaller on the inside than it did from the outside. It was subtle, but there was definitely a difference. My curiosity piqued. I stepped back outside and walked around to the back of the shed, pushing through the overgrown bushes. That's when I saw it, a second door, hidden behind the foliage. I gasped. How had I never noticed this before? The door was locked, but after searching the shed, I found 4 keys hidden inside the handle of an old shovel. With trembling hands, I tried the first key. No luck. The second key didn't work either, but the third key, it clicked. The door swung open, and inside, sitting in the center of a small, hidden space, was a large, old safe. My heart raced. What was this? I recognized it immediately. It was the safe from my dad's office, the one I used to see as a kid. He always said it was important, but I had never known why. And now, here it was, hidden away in this shed. With shaking hands, I used the final key to open the safe. The door creaked as it swung open, and inside, I found a collection of watches, my father's prized possession. He had loved watches, collected them for years, and now they were here, left behind for me. I had no idea how valuable they were, but I knew they meant the world to him. As I stared at the watches, a wave of emotion crashed over me. This was his final gift to me, his way of saying goodbye. I held one of the watches in my hand, the one he always wore on special occasions, and I felt a deep connection to him, as if he were still here with me. I closed the safe, knowing I had found something far more valuable than I ever could have imagined. This was my inheritance, not the money Julia had taken, but something much more meaningful, a piece of my father's legacy. I rushed home to tell my mother, my heart pounding with excitement. She smiled when I told her, her eyes filling with tears. "He knew you would find it," she said softly. Later, with my husband's help, we moved the safe back to my mother's house. But as we dealt with the legal and tax implications of the watches, my relationship with Julia took a darker turn. Julia came to visit one day, her mood tense and uneasy. She asked if I had come into money, hinting that she had heard something from our aunt about a gift card I had sent as a thank you for her support during Dad's illness. Julia was suspicious, and despite my best efforts to explain, she became more and more agitated. She accused me of hiding something from her, of keeping secrets about the inheritance. It wasn't long before she learned about the watches and the safe. Her jealousy grew, and our relationship became even more strained. One night, while my mother was home alone, Julia broke into the house, searching for the safe. My mother, terrified, called the police, thinking there was a burglar in the house. But when the police arrived, they found Julia, trapped under the safe, which had tipped over in her panic to escape. Julia was rushed to the hospital, and it was there that we learned the truth. She had been hiding a mountain of debt from her husband, and her reckless actions that night were driven by desperation. Her husband, fed up with her deceit, filed for divorce, and Julia was left alone to face the consequences of her choices. As for me, the watches, and my father's legacy, I found peace in knowing that I had something far more valuable than money, a connection to my father that would last a lifetime. And as I stood in my childhood home, with my husband by my side, I realized that this was where I belonged. We decided to move back, to start a new chapter in our lives, with the support of my mother as we prepared to welcome a new addition to our family. I was expecting, and though my father would never meet his grandchild, I knew he would be with us in spirit, guiding us through this new journey. In the end, I found something far more precious than I ever could have imagined: family, love, and the memories of a father who would always be with me.